My watch says 2:30, so screw you.
All right.
Let's repeat ourselves. I'm Scott.
I'm Rim.
We host Geek Nights, this podcast. You should listen to it. And we do this panel, and panels are like a zillion other conventions.
Yes, panels with provocative titles. So if you come to PAX East in a few weeks, there's a panel in the schedule with a similarly provocative title. Why no one will game with you.
Final Anime Boston panel of this year tonight at 7:30 in some other room. I forget the number.
Constitution Room, 7:30.
Oh, right.
Judge Anime by its cover. We're reviewing the entire upcoming spring season of anime.
Well, we're not reviewing, we are prejudicedly previewing.
Based on a single picture and one paragraph of description.
Each.
So,
not all anime are what they seem.
So we realized there was a thing that we noticed in a lot of media throughout the years. But anime is a particularly good example of this. It's the suddenly in space syndrome, where you're watching a show, and the show appears to be about detectives. It's a detective show, doing their detective thing, it's all based in the real world, and then aliens.
Right. So then Suddenly in Space is not to be confused with The Terrible Secret of Space. Right? The Terrible Secret of Space is awesome. It's my favorite thing ever.
Though some shows don't do it very well.
Some shows are
black.
Right, yeah. So Terrible Secret of Space is when you're watching a show and right away, or pretty early on, you know there's this horrible mystery, right? Like, say Escaflowne. How did she get transported to this other planet immediately, and how come no one can see it? They just present you with this mystery right away, and they don't answer it until the end of the show, and sometimes they don't answer it ever.
But those mysteries are usually central to the story, and you can tell in all the literature and all the previews, they always have weird proper nouns that are capitalized or in quotes, like, in the world of Boscharl, there are people who are seekers, and seekers is a capital S. Yeah, the show's going to be the terrible secret that the seekers aren't what they seem they are.
Right. So Suddenly in Space is not Terrible Secret of Space. Suddenly in Space is the show is about one thing, and then suddenly it's like, oh, you know what, we're giving up on what the show is just about. We're moving everything somewhere else.
Now, the show that epitomizes this more than anything that I can think of is probably a show called Trigun. Has anyone here not seen Trigun?
Probably most people.
Let's
not do the hand raising.
We're not going to spoil the show. We're going to avoid spoilers, but suffice it to say, this is a show that's worth watching.
Right.
Trigun is a future space cowboy western.
So if you watch like episode 1, you're thinking Western comedy. That's the only things the show looks like.
Bosch is dumb, or maybe he's brilliant, you can't really tell. That's a trope in anime. The guy, is he dumb or is he brilliant?
Right. You know, you go to episode 2, 3, 4, it still looks just like a comedy Western show. There doesn't seem to be any, seriousness about it whatsoever. By the time you get halfway through the show, it's 100% seriousness, and it's not a Western, it's a sci-fi now.
Now this is where we came up with the term Suddenly in Space, because we were watching the show in an era when fan subs were hard to come by. Digital fan subs just barely existed. We were still watching things on VHS, most people didn't know DVD players. So what we did is we found these real media RM files that were Trigun. This was like 120p. So we're watching it together. We'd huddle around a computer, 1p, just one pixel. So we'd be watching the show, like huddle around a computer monitor, because you couldn't put computers up to TVs back then. And then suddenly we watch one episode, and we think we have the wrong file. The opener doesn't play, it's just like the spaceship. And then there's all this space drama, and all these characters we don't recognize. We're like, what?
I think it's episode 23? 17?
I think it was
something like that, I don't remember.
The episode was so weird that we paused it. We looked at the file and we're like, maybe someone named it wrong. We flipped through the episode, it's still all these characters. We eventually figure out, oh, it's a flashback to Suddenly in Space. What's the show really about? And a lot of other shows have done this. Like, I don't know if anyone's seen a show called Gasaraki. I love the show. It's possibly one of those.
No one else in this room is likely to like that show. Imagine one person.
Imagine a realistic show about mecha, meaning they're just tanks. 20 minutes of procedural tank drama. I love the crap out of that show.
Some whole episode about like freaking commodities market.
The final plot point in the show, like the epic moment, is the president of the United States and someone in the Japanese government having a conversation about whether or not to reinstate subsidies on rice transports. And the guy cuts his eyes out over it. I don't remember.
Yeah.
You know what? A guy cuts his eyes out over this. So that show is modern future mecha action in one episode. Suddenly the opener's different. The song's different, and the show is set in like medieval Japan. Right? And then the show kind of brings it all back together.
Yeah. So I mean, that show was what it seemed. It just took you to a different place. So it had this, just because you have this suddenly in space mechanic going on in your plot, doesn't mean the show isn't what it seems. Gatsuraki is exactly what it seems to be.
Exactly.
Trigun is not what it seems to be.
If you watch the first 4 episodes and review it, you'll have a very different review from if you watch the last 4 episodes and review it. It's almost like a completely different show. But this can be done well or poorly depending on the anime. Trigun does it well. There's a lot of foreshadowing. You can piece it all together. It all makes sense as an arc. Some other shows we talk about don't do this. But there's another reason this is a suddenly in space show. On the surface, it appears to be about like life and death and killing and not. But really, the show is 100% a full-on allegory about pacifism. And whether or not pacifism is viable. Whether or not being a pacifist is something you can do, whether or not you should do, and has a morally complex and ambiguous answer even at the end. The show looks like a goofy anime. It actually addresses really serious issues in a way that really makes you think. Something not a lot of shows do. And a lot of people don't expect that. Another very good example of this is Evangelion. Watch the first episode again, pretending you don't know where this show goes.
That's sort of impossible. Right? Actually, it's completely impossible.
Has anyone here never seen Evangelion?
We're not going to ask this for every show.
We're not. Some people have not.
Yes, of course they have, but you don't need to count how many.
Yeah.
Right? The point is that, we know as anime fans, you know too much about Evangelion before you see it even, right? You've at least heard of it, you've seen something about it, you've heard something about it. So it's hard to realize, but this does sort of have this suddenly in space, right? And if you just watch Evangelion episode 1, and you've never seen or heard anything about it before in your life, it is just a robot show as far as you can
It's doing comedy, there's a bunch of fan service, it looks like any robot show. We got like
all those
serious
scenes of like, what's the penguin's name? Pen, and like drinking, and all this silly stuff is in those early episodes, right? It looks just like every other normal giant robot fighting show.
And it has foreshadowing. It sort of sounds like, oh, maybe there's some issues, maybe this is deeper. But then it has that turning point where suddenly shit goes wrong. Suddenly the show is serious. Suddenly you're not laughing.
Right. Imagine if you had watched this on Japanese TV, like originally, right at the beginning, right? You would have been totally fooled. 100%.
Now, I had the interesting circumstance where, we couldn't get fan subs. So back in the day, I would mail VHS tapes to some guy, and he would mail me back fan subs that he made of like Sailor Moon from his Laserdisc masters with his Genlock machine. And that guy had all of Sailor Moon, so yeah, I got all of Sailor Moon. I watched it all in like one weekend. And then he had this thing called End of Evangelion. Like, what's that? Whatever, it's an anime movie, I'll get it. So I took one of my friends, my DVD group, like, hey, I found this anime movie, let's watch it.
Oh,
and I remember when it ended, they turned to me and they said, and I go, Rim, what the fuck was that? So then, like, a year later, I realized that that was the end of the TV show.
You guys are really, everyone is really spoiled now. You have to appreciate, like, the fact that we have internet and we can know, like, oh, there's a TV series and a movie and you can figure this stuff out before you just start watching random tapes, right? That's a big deal.
Yeah. So we'll get back to Ava a little bit later. Scrap Princess is a show that does a very similar thing to Ava and to Trigun, in that the show seems to be about one thing, and that's this thing going on, but it doesn't do it well. When the suddenly in space happens in the show, it is after the commercial break in the last episode. Not to spoil the rest of the show.
I thought it was after the credits in the last episode.
No, that is
that's an extra.
Alien 9.
Oh.
Alien 9.
Alien 9.
So Scrap Princess is like this fantasy show. It's a good show. I liked it. It's a solid B anime. I skipped a class that I needed to graduate just to watch this one weekend at RIT.
I watched like 4 episodes. The reason I watch it is because like it's a fantasy show, right? And there aren't, no matter what you think, you might think there's tons of fantasy anime. No, there really aren't that many, right? In terms of like high fantasy wizards and knights and that sort of stuff. There's not a lot of anime that cover that ground relative to other genres and settings and whatnot. So I was into it, and it had the thing I like, the terrible secret of space, right? Like, what's the deal with the Scrap Princess, right? Ooh, it's a mystery. I'll find out hopefully at the end of the show. But yeah, it didn't really go anywhere in those like 5-6 episodes I watched or whatever. So I stopped watching, but Rim kept going.
I like the show a lot, but seriously, I'm gonna spoil it via analogy. Seriously. After the eye catch at the second half of the last episode, oh my God, it's actually the Matrix. Now it's the Matrix. The whole rest of this is the Matrix. It's like that.
It's horseshit.
So some shows do it well. If you watch Ava again,
or you watch it knowing where it's going, you see that it's all foreshadowing. You see Shinji cringe a little bit when his father appears. You see all these subtle tells. Trigun, you see all those moments where you see him acting very seriously.
Yeah, it's like, could the weird silly guy be Vicious Stampede? Right? They sort of hint at it a little bit early on, right? It's not just out of nowhere, and it's not at the end, right? So think about the actual Matrix. The Matrix lets you know that the Matrix is a thing, like 20 minutes in, maybe?
Yep. But
pretty early on in the movie.
Nothing else spoiled it. I wouldn't see the Matrix literally not knowing what it was about.
I had no clue.
When they revealed what that movie was about, the whole audience went, oh, whoa.
If they had done that at like 10 minutes away from the ending, it would have been like, screw you, what the, right? Oh my God. Right, but the fact, it's all about the timing, right? Timing is very important.
And sometimes the meta of a movie or show will ruin it. Terminator 2, Judgment Day. Arnold Schwarzenegger is the hero. He's fighting the goofy guy.
Yeah, if you see, a lot of people saw Terminator 2 not having seen Terminator 1, right? Because Terminator 2 is this huge, mega blockbuster, and Terminator 1 was like just an 80s action movie, whatevs, right? In Terminator 1, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the Terminator, and he was the bad guy, period. End of story, pretty straightforward movie. In Terminator 2, spoilers, whatever, Arnold Schwarzenegger is the good guy, but he's still the Terminator. So you saw Terminator 1 and then 2, you're thinking Arnold's the bad guy, right, for that whole beginning part of the movie, and then you find out he's the good guy, it's a surprise.
And if you watch the movie pretending that you don't know he's the good guy, they really do not let you know at all. There is zero
And then lead you on too, like the scenes like running away from him, and like, you know, where the characters are acting like he's the bad guy, and the shots of like showing him coming closer, like, you know, shooting him as if he's the monster in a horror film, like coming to get someone. Like, they lead you on expecting you as the viewer to think he's the bad guy from the beginning.
But then the trailers and the promotional material, not blessed by the director, completely spoiled that and actually really angered me.
Right, and of course, even if you didn't see the trailers and whatnot that spoiled it, then you still didn't have this assumption coming from having seen the first.
You almost have to sequester yourself from the internet, which can't be done.
And I don't recommend doing that either, right?
So Big Up
It's showtime.
is an example of that between two seasons of an anime. And there's a lot of interesting stuff. You know, not anime or what they seem. This one tells you a lot about the anime industry as well. This was not popular in Japan
At all.
The sequel only happened because of America. It was released here first. They dubbed it in English before they dubbed it in Japanese.
The way you can tell, usually, without going to Japan and asking people which shows are popular in Japan and which shows are popular in America, is merchandise, right? It's like, we know Cowboy Bebop is big here. How much Cowboy Bebop merch do you see in the dealer's room, right? Not much. I see more Space Battles of Yamato merchandise in the dealer's room. But that show, I guess, is popular with old guys in the US.
Yeah.
But compared to Cowboy Bebop, not much. Right? But shouldn't there be more Cowboy Bebop merch? No, because the Japanese people make all the merch, right?
But Big Up Season 1 has this sort of, it has a secret of space, and it has a suddenly in space. But the suddenly in space isn't really addressed, and the secret in space is also not addressed at all. So the show reveals none of its secrets, and it's just Batman and a giant robot punching other giant robots in the face with what is literally the greatest sequence of something punching something in anime ever.
Well, until they make the One Punch Man anime.
Yeah. But, you know, to be fair, the only reason I say the best is because Kenshiro, each individual punch in
that's a series of punches, otherwise I would have mentioned it. That is not a single punch.
Yeah, the series of punches combined is the greatest selection of punches.
Right. But, you know, when One Punch Man comes, there's a reason.
You guys haven't seen this. That piston comes out of his elbow to give extra punch after he punches.
Right. So, of course, you watch this show, you can watch a bunch of episodes, and it seems like Batman plus punching. That's all it seems. It doesn't reveal anything else to you whatsoever until season 2, when it's no longer about punching, it's now about eating tomatoes.
All about tomatoes. Barcode and tomatoes. This is basically Evangelion. But again, what's interesting, if you watch the show, and it's hard to tell how much of this was planned, which an example from American media would be Lost. How much of Lost was actually planned versus them just literally going to old episodes saying, hey, let's take that thing and make it a thing.
Right, and then of course it's planned to some extent, right? All TV shows are like a team of writers, or at least, you know, one original author or something, right? But was it planned from the beginning and then they made the whole show, or did they put episodes out to the public, get a public reaction, and then write new episodes?
Because Big O Season 1 has things that are mysteries in every episode that are not solved. but they're not a big deal. You can just ignore them, it doesn't bother you. Every one of them comes back in season 2 and feeds into the dark secret of space. And then the end of Big O2 is suddenly in space, and it's basically end of Evangelion without the creepy hospital scene. It's not an 18+ panel, so yeah. So Shinsekai Yori, we always talk about old anime in these panels. There's a big reason for that. I might really like Kill la Kill. Kill la Kill is the best.
It is. Oh my god, have you lost your way?
Don't lose your way. Don't lose your way is my ringtone and my alarm to wake me up.
And if you meet him on Street Pass, he says don't lose your way.
I'm too close to it. It's hard for me to say, like, if you ask someone at this con today, what are the greatest anime, they'll be like, Attack on Titan, Kill la Kill. You go back to when I was going to Otakons in like 2002, 2003, and I split the best anime, they'll be like, Ranma 1/2 and Fushigi Yugi.
If you go back like a handful of years to like maybe 03, 04, 05, people like Full Metal Alchemist, best anime ever. Oh my god. Who's still talking about Full Metal Alchemist? I haven't even seen an Ever Elric at this convention.
They're talking about Brotherhood.
I'm sure there's one somewhere, right? But I haven't seen it. There used to be 1,000 of them, and now there's what, like a handful.
So like we always talk about Evangelion. If you love Ava, if you hate Ava, the fact that you're even talking about it means a lot, because that show is way old. But at the same time, new shows, it's hard to tell. We don't know if it'll have staying power or not. But I want to talk about this because if you want to see a show that does both of these things very well, this show looks like a typical shoujo show. It's not. It looks like it's going to be more lighthearted than it is. It's not. It has an extremely complex and nuanced moral that you're going to think, it looks like 1984 with psychics in the future, but the moral is actually pretty harsh and pretty real world.
And see, this goes to even more extremes of not what it seems, right? We're talking about not just like you watch a few episodes and it seems like this one show, but actually something else. We're talking about you just look at the artwork of the show and you think you've already, oh, it's some sort of magical girls' school show or something. Yeah. And you see the manga is way perverted compared to the anime, which is still somewhat perverted, but
not really.
Not as much.
Basically, if you want, the shtick of the show, to give you an idea, is that it's about a world like ours where one day people manifest psychic powers. Pretty common anime plot.
Yeah, espers and whatnot.
Billions die. It shows you this montage of just that. I mean, if half the people in this room became gods, the other half probably wouldn't make it. I sneeze and I accidentally think about people blowing up and Kenshiro happens.
Oops.
So, then the show cuts to possibly thousands of years in the future, and society has kind of dealt with this by having this sort of, like, it's almost like Shinto and the gods and the religions become real, and the people make their world and their society around these ideas from mythology to contain their own power. And then it's about a bunch of kids growing up in this sort of Orwellian future society. But even then, it's not quite what it seems. You think they're going to be exploring the mystery, and just when you think you're predicting the show, it skips like 10 years in the future. Okay, and then you think you see where it's going, then it skips. The end of the show, they're all adults. Every one of these characters who makes it is an adult.
And you look at that artwork, and you would think any of that? No.
Yeah, don't even Google image search for this. The anime is beautiful, the manga is literally porn.
Yeah.
It is awful.
So people probably don't even know what this thing is.
You should watch this movie.
This is worth watching. I don't want to say it's good, but you need to see it. So it's a single movie. It won't take you that long to watch. It's called Flying Phantom Ship or Flying Ghost Ship.
It's one of the first anime ever dubbed for Russia.
Yeah, it's a collaboration between Japan and Russia.
Well, it was a collaboration in terms of the release and the translation, but it wasn't animated by anyone in Russia.
Yeah, I don't think so. So you watch this movie, right?
What does this look like? What's going on here? Is this Scooby-Doo?
And like the first 30 minutes seems like Scooby-Doo. Just straight up. There's even the dog, right? And he's like, oh, what's the mystery of, you know, what's going on?
Yeah, there's a freaking pirate ship, and there's a pirate ghost on it, but it's a dude in a costume. Like, right away, Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo.
Right, you think it's going to be a big, long Scooby-Doo movie that happens to be sort of, you know, anime-ish, right?
Well, it's long.
Yeah.
I'll give it that.
Then, when you get closer to the end, after the Scooby-Doo comes off, no, not at all.
It becomes an old, bad horror movie you might have seen called The Stuff. Some people have seen that. But then, it becomes something with space and giant clams?
Well, in some ways it becomes Jill in there.
There is some Jill in there.
Right, yeah, I mean,
This show is not what it looks like, and it's not that good, but you should all watch it anyway.
Well, it's got a little bit of They Live, too.
Now, there's a lot of They Live when you put on the sunglasses.
Well, drink the soda.
So now and then, here and there, is kind of an obscure show. If you watch episode 1 of this, it looks like a Ghibli sort of kid goes on an adventure into a magical world. It is the happiest show ever. The whole rest of the show is just a punch in the gut. This show is about child soldiers, rape, murder, death, a post-apocalyptic. This show is...
It might be like the most depressing anime ever. It's up there.
It's one step up the grade of the
If there's going to be a fight, if there's going to be an elimination tournament for most depressing anime ever, it's a 1 seed in one of the divisions for sure.
But if you watch the first episode or look at a lot of the promotional material, it literally looks like this kid goes on an epic adventure. He meets this princess. He's like running up on this tower with this dragon. Everyone's smiling, and then his child soldiers fighting realistic wars for the entire rest of the show.
It's a little bit of Final Fantasy-ish in its sort of setting, right? Where it's fantasy, but there's also sort of modern technology, like Magitech kind of stuff, you know, metal factories and modern guns and things. But yeah, it's worth watching.
So there's another category of anime. These are the anime where you look at them just on the surface detail and you think there's something very different from what they are, or seems like a good show, but then your mom walks in and just that one moment. It's way different from the rest of the show. The show where the anime fan will tell you all around about how Kill la Kill is this wonderful deconstruction of the magical girl genre, and non-anime fans just wonder why they're not wearing pants.
Right, so, you know, to us as anime fans, the show is what it seems, right? If you watch Kill la Kill or whatever, you know exactly what that is. But to a normal person, who's not some crazy person like us, that show is not what it seems at all. They just see, well, this is a show about nakedness, clearly, right? The visual, this is a single image, the first image they see, right? That's their first impression, right? And they don't have any context for seeing other anime or any fandom knowledge or anything like that. So to them, the show isn't what it seems, even though it may be what it seems to us.
So Princess Tutu. This is our go-to example. I think we finally got it to the point where almost everyone has heard of it.
Yeah.
But seriously.
They should pay us for selling this show.
People kept telling us to watch the show, watch the show. So finally we said, sure.
So you look at it, the first image is ballerinas dancing cuteness, right? You think it's a show for little girls, that's your first impression, and that would be the same impression for somebody, you know, who had never seen any anime before ever.
This is like a younger version of Shoujo Kakumeyu 10. This show has the secret in space, the terrible, everything about this show is everything that you all probably like about anime, but a lot of people would never even think to look at a show like this.
It is dark, yeah.
This is probably the best example of this in recent memory. This is the show where everyone literally ignored it until the people who review anime basically said, yo dog, you need to watch this show.
Right, I mean, I knew that there was a show called this, and then I saw a picture of it, and I'm like, it's another magical girl show, I don't need to watch that.
I've already seen Fancy La La and Sailor Moon.
And then there was a thread in our forum for it, and I'm like, okay, I guess someone's watching it. And then that thread was like, kept getting bumped up, like over and over again. And I'm like, why is this magical girl show on my front page of my forum, like every day? What's going on here? So I went to investigate, and I'm like, oh, it wasn't what it seemed.
Yep. Now, it wasn't what it seemed for a number of reasons. One, it had Yuki Kajiura music, which up until this point, most of the shows that had her music were not good shows, but they had great soundtracks. So I almost considered her music being in a show as a point against it, just from a historical perspective.
And where knowing too much actually gives you a bad impression, right? It's like knowing too little can turn you off of something like Kill la Kill, and knowing too much can turn you off. It's like, I know that director, everything he's made is crap. Oh, he finally made one good one, and you didn't watch it because it was one good one.
Yep, like Miyazaki's son. His first movie, Earth City.
Well, we knew that was going to be bad.
But he made another movie, it's actually pretty good.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, you look at this, you don't know what to expect. People keep saying, just watch the first 3 episodes, watch the first 3 episodes. We watch it, and we know that this is what that show is. But your dad walks in and right there.
Not that this part is any good.
Well, I think it is good, because there's a lot of reasons why this is actually a very good scene.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess you could say trigger warning, but that's studio trigger warning.
If you haven't seen the show, I just want to point out, we did not censor this. That's actually, that lens flare is in the show.
If you haven't seen it, I mean, what kind of anime fan are you?
Kill la Kill is one of those shows that at first glance, if you see this stuff, you think this is going to be one of those weird, corny shows. If you see this, you think this is going to be one of those weird, old shows. But really, this show is kind of the kind of anime that people get into anime with, but no one likes to talk about it. Everyone thinks we get into anime with the accessible shows, like Cowboy Bebop's. But really, most people get into anime in the US, they get in with like Vampire Hunter D, or some ridiculous
Or at least they used to.
Yeah, they get into something weird. They're drawn to anime because it's not like the things they're used to, and then they fan it.
Well, the other reason this is a good show, right, for people getting into anime is because it's so much energy, right? When you watch it and they say, don't lose your way, like, yes! Oh, yes. It's just like, it makes you feel so good.
Excited there.
Right, yeah, it does.
You feel really good.
So you get super pumped up like you're at a music concert or something every time, right? The music comes on, the scissors come out, you're just like, yes, let's do it. You know, other animes that might be really good and intellectual, you might like more, right? It's not my favorite anime ever. There's plenty of shows I like more, such as Quiet Trains in Space. But when I watch Quiet Trains in Space, I'm not getting pumped up. Right? I'm not getting psyched to go and do shit.
This is a show that has the recap episode in the middle, and the recap episode is 10 seconds long, and then the regular episode starts. And in the middle of the recap, the announcer is like, you were really sweating that this was a recap, weren't you? But that's not how we roll it here. But also, it's a show where whatever you think it looks like, it is so coached and referenced that if you watch it, having not seen a lot of anime, it might seem really crazy, really grand, and really over the top. If you've seen a lot of anime, this is just homage and reference to every anime that has ever come before it. There is so much reference material woven into this story. Woven in, see what I'm doing there? Oh. And it gets to the point where you could pick out individual scenes and say, this is literally this scene from Sailor Moon, this scene from Hokuto no Ken, this scene from Shoujo Kakame 10, to a T. But it also has this interesting thing going on where if you watch it and you ignore the proper nouns, you know, you read Game of Thrones, some crazy fantasy novel, there's all these proper nouns, the Bafferdags and the Bothons,
the house of such and such and the lord of who that.
If you replace all those proper nouns with Jabberwocky and gibberish, you can start to see what a show is about. This show is the same as every other dramatic fighting kind of anime that isn't a Shonen fighting show. All the same beats, all the same actions, all the same story progressions. They just replace every reference to like secret organizations with nudist speech. So when named Amnesia.
I forget what this is about. Remind me.
So when named Amnesia. This is a sci-fi anime movie. It's kind of old. Not a lot of people have seen it. It has a pretty good gist. It looks like a sort of post-apocalyptic sci-fi. And it is. Straight up. All the way through. This movie is just, these aliens wiped out all of humankind's memories. Humans are just beasts now, acting on instinct. Except one dude. And then an alien comes down and says, yo, if you can get any one other human to come with us on our journey, we're not going to murder all of you and destroy your planet. They're trying to see what humans really are at their essence to figure out if they're allowed to exist on the galactic scale. And that seems like a pretty good premise. That works out pretty well. I can't show you because it's porn. But the very end of this movie, after all this sci-fi plot is resolved, is sort of this denouement that is just this really long, surprisingly detailed sex scene. And I remember so distinctly that a dude was licking something. And my mom walks in. And I had that conversation many of you might have had. Mom, it just out like this just now. I swear. And she's like, sure.
Watch it from the beginning, I'll prove it to you.
Meanwhile, my dad's reaction was
Mom, sit and watch this movie with me.
My dad's reaction was, and I quote, this is a lot better than that Sailor whatever bullshit you're usually watching. So remember those shows where it looks like it's about X, it is about X, but then your mom walks in, and it's not Dragon Half, it's Dragon Pink.
So this is the Studio Ghibli movie that nobody watches. Maybe, I mean, it gets better than Earthsea.
It's a great Studio Ghibli movie. It's not a Miyazaki movie, though. They are not the same thing. There are other directors in Studio Ghibli.
Really? It's a whole studio and more than one person works there? You don't say.
A lot of people think this is just a happy story about Tanuki.
And it is, a lot of it is a happy story about Tanuki, and those are the good parts of this movie.
It's also a sad story about time.
That's okay, it's a Ghibli movie, we expect some sadness.
It also involves the biggest testicles I've ever seen in my life.
I thought we were done with the porns.
So, a lot of Americans don't really know about, like, Japanese, like, we see references to Japanese stuff, Japanese legend, Japanese myth, but unless you watch a lot of anime and know something about Japan, people tend to gloss over some of the details. Tanuki are known for having enormous testicles that they use as tools. They use them
You can see them right there.
Oh, hey. I guess we should censor that now, it's not 18 plus.
It's an animal, it's not a...
This movie is one of the biggest disconnects between what the average non-anime fan expects to see when they see a DVD in Blockbuster. Wow, I just said a lot of things that don't exist anymore. And what they actually get, when I guarantee if you watch this movie, you're going to be crying your eyes out by the end of it.
Right. Usually when a country has some sort of folklore, they like to share their folklore with the rest of the world, cultural exchanges and whatnot. Us Americans, we can tell everyone about Paul Bunyan and stuff like that, right? But if you have some weird folklore like Tanuki with...
I don't know, Paul Bunyan's pretty weird.
It's not as weird as that, right? It's not going to make people go, right? You don't really want to share that so much, which is why even if you're familiar with, Japanese folklore in some way, you might not have read anything about all this weird Tanuki nut business.
It also really helped. I was in the theater recently in New York, because kind of a cool aside, in New York City, every anime movie is in the theater. Just every anime movie.
In New York City, you can have everything. I can't not live in New York City. I don't know how you don't live there. Boston sucks. Yankees do suck. Go Mets. How about 86? 86?
Yankees suck and Mets suck.
Whatever. Rip hates baseball. Whatever.
I root for the Tigers.
Let's not diss him for doing well.
You know where my life's going. Tigers, Lions, Red Wings.
Continue.
So, I was in the theater in New York seeing Pom Poko, and there's a scene where a large number of the Tanuki decide to commit suicide. So this is coached in Japanese legend and myth. So they create a ship of mud and transform it into a real ship. And they use their testicles to do this. And they sail off having a huge party in the ship. Anyone who knows anything about Japanese myth and legend was crying. The people who didn't know were watching the movie, and they thought it was just like those Tanuki won. They didn't realize they were killing themselves. They thought it was a hilarious scene of them capering on this ship, having this giant feast, sailing off into the sunset. And it was interesting to see a theater where half the audience is literally crying, and everyone else is laughing. So now we're going to get a little trolly here.
Alright, so we talked about a lot of shows where it seemed like the show was going to be about one thing, but it was actually about something else. Or the plot looked like it was going in one direction, but actually what was really happening was some other direction. This is not that. This is shows that you thought were going to be good. They were. They're still about what you thought they were going to be about the whole time. They didn't hide anything from you. They just seemed good in the beginning and then went downhill into Bruceville.
So, Noir tricked me.
Alright, we already talked about Yuki Kaijura and her amazing music and the shows to which it applied, right? And how up until Madoka Magica, we said, hey, every show with Yuki Kaijura music started out as a good show and had this amazing music, but turned out to not be a good show in the long run. This was the first of those shows.
At RT Anime, we showed one episode of this to a crowd of people, like our anime club. And everyone loved it. Episode 1 of this show
is the biggest hit.
It's about assassins, it's got this mystery. There's this scene where a dude gets hung by his own necktie that is amazing. If you haven't seen the show, watch episode 1 of this, and when the necktie thing happens, you'll go, ooh, that was a good necktie.
And the music, I just talked about the music, but it's so good.
The music was so good that we kept watching the show. And we didn't notice that after about 5 episodes, the show turned to shit.
It just
wasn't going anywhere.
The plot was not moving. It was just like, oh my god, something's happening.
And then it started
Nothing's happening.
Like episode 1, 2, 3, 4 were actually pretty realistic too. Like the guns were realistic, the fights were realistic, the story made sense. And then it got to the point where 2 girls with tiny pistols run up a stairway, shooting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and somehow aren't shot back. And then the nuns
they're not Superman or anything, they're just normal people.
And the nuns have guns.
The nuns with guns, right. That's where the show ends up. It's not even joking, literally, nuns with guns. Yeah.
But because the music was so good, I continued watching the show.
I got fooled. Even a seasoned anime fan, and well, I wasn't as seasoned as I am now, but I was fooled. They got me.
So then later, another show came out called Hexon. And episode 1,
It's dot
the music was amazing, the show was amazing, and the concept was cool, because now it seems like people trapped in a virtual world is a genre, but it wasn't really as common back then.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, this is a plot that I'm getting into, right? I mean, you know, it's a sort of a tired plot now. There's plenty of shows that use the sort of everyone's living in an MMO kind of situation, but this is the first one that I remember.
But watch episode 1 again and really pay attention to the atmosphere that they set up. It's very sinister, it feels very deep. The show feels very ponderous and sad and good. And then as you keep watching, almost nothing happens. If I wanted to summarize everything that happens in the show that matters, it'd be maybe a paragraph. It's just, key of the Twilight something something, key of the Twilight something something, and then a bunch of really awesome music, and then the same conversation happens again between 2 different characters. So Chevalier d'Eon was a show that was really pushed in the United States. This was one of those shows that was going to be the next Full Metal Alchemist.
Yeah, they marketed this relatively heavily compared to other shows. You know, DVDs came out pretty quickly. It was available legally streaming pretty quickly after it came out. You know?
And it did the same thing that these 2 shows did. Episode 1 introduces a large number of elements that individually are extremely appealing to people like all of us. They give us a couple of mysteries. They interesting characters that all have really interesting flaws or interesting mysteries we want to discover. But then after that, the show never has the same beats. Every other episode doesn't really follow the same speed of action as episode 1. This show, episode 1, a ton of stuff happens. All this cool allegory. Then really nothing happens for like the next 9 episodes.
Right, I think this sort of thing is usually a consequence of bad writing, right? It's like someone comes up with maybe a good story, but then they need to display that story across 26, 13 episodes, whatever. So like, well, we have to get a certain amount of stuff in the first episode, otherwise people won't have a reason to watch the second one, right? We need to give them enough there so that they know what's going on and they're completely confused. Like if you cut episode 1 in half and that was your first episode, it's like you'd be like, what? This is good, what? And you would never watch again. So they put a whole bunch of stuff in the first episode, and there's just not enough story left for the rest of the episodes. They stretch it real thin.
Now this is where you can see these shows where you probably like them. Like I like these shows okay. I'm not saying they're like the worst anime.
Yeah, they're not horrible by any means.
They're like solid B-level anime. Like they're enjoyable. If they're your thing, they're really good. I enjoyed them. I mean,
but they seemed like they were amazing anime from the first episode. And if every episode was like the first, you would just be the greatest. We can talk about how these are the most amazing animes ever made.
You can tell when there's a show where an episode ends and you don't immediately need to watch the next episode. The shows where it almost feels like a slog. Another similar show was a thing called Kaze no Yojimbo, which is based on Fistful of Dollars or Yojimbo. Famous old movies. It looked great. It was that kind of plot. And I watched like 8 episodes on the train, and then I was about to put in the next DVD in my laptop, and I look at it, and I'm like, do I really want to watch this? And then later, I rewatched Evangelion, and I watched episode 13, and I really had to watch episode 14 right then, right after that.
I mean, and you can tell when the show's extra good, right? We watch all of Monica, and I'm like, I need to go watch episode 1 again, right after I finish episode 13. Let's spin it around, let's go.
So, every shonen fighting show.
Right, well not every shonen fighting show, but most shonen fighting shows, right? The stereotypical shonen fighting show, you know, almost always in those first few episodes is, again, introducing the plot and the characters. Like Yu Yu Hakusho starts off really awesome. You see all this school, and they introduce all this,
the characters are all great.
Yeah.
Bleach, I love those characters. They're really interesting people. The world seems interesting. Right. Solita has so much style that I would watch it for style alone based on episode 1.
Naruto's the greatest example. The first 4 episodes of Naruto are the most hilarious ninja school I have ever seen in my entire life. If they just made the whole show just ninja school of comedy, that would be one of my favorite shows. But after like episode 5, 6, it's like, okay, ninja school's over. Well, not really, but you know, it goes away from silly school and is now dragged out fight the last 10 episodes.
Now, everybody gets their one shonen fighting show, and some people get into all shonen fighting shows. We're not saying shonen fighting is bad. We're saying that every shonen fighting show sets up a really interesting world and all this stuff. So it's easy to be tricked into watching it and not realizing that the rest of it is just going to be the fighting tournaments.
Yeah, if you haven't like researched the show beforehand to see how many volumes of manga there are and notice that there's 200 of them, then you won't necessarily know. I didn't know Naruto was some long-ass shonen fighting show until I got to episode like 10, 11 and realized, oh, wait, we've been fighting this guy since what episode? What happened?
Was it One Piece in the fish man? You're like, wait a minute,
yeah,
how long has this fight been going on?
I freaking love One Piece. I was reading the manga, right? And it's like, I just love the hell out of it. And then at like volume 12 or something, I'm like, oh, they finally beat the Fishman. And then I'm like, wait a minute, when did we start fighting the Fishman? It was like volume 8 or something. And I'm like, I just bought 6 volumes of Fishman fight. And then of course, I'm like, all right, I'm going to stop ordering this, right? I'm not going to read it anymore. And then one more volume shows up that I pre-ordered. And since the Fishman fight was done, it got back to the awesomeness of One Piece, all the wacky pirate hijinks. And I'm like, that's why I love this. And then I'm like, wait a minute, do not buy the next one. It will be Fishman 2.
So, we talked about the beginning of a show is different from the end. These are the examples of shows that if you watch episode 1, it's not just they look really good, they look like the most amazing thing you have ever seen in your life.
Right.
This show, we saw the first episode of it, and we all looked at each other like, what was that? We gotta find more, and it wasn't more.
Whatever the hell, right, so this is a weird thing. The way this came out, at least in the US, there was one episode that came out illegally, right? Only one, and we watched the hell out of it.
It was basically like take 50s futurism and take it into modern sci-fi. So laser guns look like that, but it's very like super serious future.
And it's weird because they have like super new technology in terms of like ships and stuff, but there's people using like ridiculously old-fashioned like cameras. Right, at the same time. It's like, what is up with the technology and the setting in this world? Whatever it is, it's awesome.
I've never seen a show with a style like this. The characters are interesting. It's kind of like when you watch that first episode of the Read or Die OAV. It's just like, what?
It's like you took something slightly futuristic and added some steampunk, but you didn't go all steampunk. You only went like half steampunk.
And then you double down on that premise and move as fast as possible.
Right, so episode 1 was like the most unbelievable thing we'd ever seen, but episodes 2, 3, 4, whatever, there's only a few, I think it's an OAV, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't get illegally translated or whatever. We waited for the legal real deal, where you bought like one DVD that had the whole thing. And we watched it, and the rest of it was not nearly as amazing as the start.
They're almost like trap shows where they move so quickly, so early, that there's literally no way the rest of the show could live up to that potential. Ava starts here and builds the whole way. If you start here, it's really hard to keep going up, so most likely you're going to go down. Even in the East, I think, had a very similar problem. I watched episode 1, and it just had this feel. It was really interesting. And every episode started focusing on all the things I didn't care about. I don't care about all your derpy friends. I want to find out what's up with the actual plot.
Right, the premise of Eden in the East is like this guy shows up like on the streets of DC, meets a Japanese tourist.
Oh, no, this guy shows up on the streets of DC naked with a gun.
With a gun and a cell phone, and the cell phone is loaded with like $1 jillion. He can buy anything he wants, and he doesn't remember anything. Right? And it's like, that's a secret of space I need to know. Whatever the mystery is, I need to answer it today.
Yeah, you know what? The mystery itself, not so great.
No, the answer is not a good answer. But after that first episode, which introduces this amazing premise, it's like, there's like 5 episodes like in a mall, almost in a sort of a zombie situation, and all this weird stuff that has nothing to do with finding out what's going on.
So my recommendation for a show like this, if you haven't seen Project Blue GQ SOS, watch episode 1 and pretend it was a movie. If you really like it, watch the rest, but prepare to be disappointed. But that episode 1, oh my god.
Right. It's worth watching the whole thing. And then just when you see these other things, just be like, oh, that's like Project Blue or GQ SOS. I don't need to watch, you know. Alright.
Yeah, and also we're trying to save you time. If you watch a show that seems really good, and then like you're not feeling the next episode after a couple episodes, just bail. Go ahead and bail, because if you're wrong...
You don't have to watch the whole thing, guys. You don't have to catch them all. It's not Pokemon.
If you start to find yourself petering out, just stop. Because you know what? If it turns out the show was Madoka Magica, someone you know will tell you. So, I had a friend. And my friend didn't watch one of the better anime I've ever seen for like a decade. Because the way it was described to him as, it's like Inspector Gadget, but it's in space. Oh, and there's a bunch of girls, so it's kind of like a harem show too.
Right, so you know, this is a really good show, right? But somebody who is trying to sell someone on the show did a bad job of recommending it. Hey Rim, this is a great show, Kill La Kill, you should watch it. It's like got so much nakedness going on. Right? That's not gonna make Rim want to watch it, right?
Well, depending on the kind of person I am.
Right, but it's a bad recommendation for Rim at least. Right? right? So based on that, he's now not going to watch this show that actually is now he's crazy excited about.
Yeah, that show was actually Irresponsible Captain Tyler.
Which is sort of like Inspector Gadget in space.
Yeah, I can see
why you would describe it that way, but that's a really bad way of doing it. You're a bad salesman.
So I'm going to try to sell this show to you. This show is kind of what a lot of Gurren Lagann was based on, for real, mixed with Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Yeah.
This show is a pretty amazing show. It's kind of an older, forgotten show. It had a bigger budget than you would have expected it to have. I've never seen anything that's been quite like it. It's one of those old, almost like weird camaraderie comedies where you have a huge cast of goons who are always doing their goony crap in the background all the time. Like, the crew is just ridiculous. I love this show, but because it was recommended as Inspector Gadget in space with girls to someone who hates Inspector Gadget,
I like this
but loves both Gurren Lagann and Legend of the Galactic Heroes, he really missed out on this show.
Until it was too late. Well, no, it's not too late.
It's never too late. Yeah, he didn't die.
He's good. You have a lot of time left in your life, I hope, right? You don't need to worry about missing out on some anime, right? So, you know, if you've got a few animes to choose from, choose the one that you are most confident in that is good, and if it turns bad, stop watching and go to the second choice in the queue, right? If you miss something, I hope you have life back, you know, time in your life to go back and correct your mistakes. Don't worry about it.
So Master Keaton is one of those shows. It's getting a little more press now because I think it's going to be re-released, but when this was released...
Well, the manga's going to come out now, I think, finally in English.
When the anime was released in the US, nobody watched it. Because no one knew what it was. It just looked like this guy, slice of life, no one really promoted it, no one knew what it was.
I remember that one Otakon where they had like the ultra discount DVD blowout. They get rid of all the old DVDs that no one could ever sell ever. And you'd buy like, I bought like all of Master Keaton for like 20 bucks or something. They were like Zeta Gundam boxes for 20 bucks.
So this show is basically MacGyver. This guy solves problems in a MacGyver way, and it's Urasawa. You might know him from Monster or Billy Bat.
20th Century Boys.
These are amazing manga, and this is an anime adaptation of yet another one of his amazing manga. But because back in the day people didn't know who Urasawa was in the US, and they didn't know what Master Keaton was, it was completely ignored. And no one would even recommend it because the industry didn't recommend it. It was just ignored, and then it failed, and no one understood why.
Right, if you looked at the DVD boxes, it's like, what is this? This boring show about a businessman? Like, what is this thing, right?
If
but in the first episode, he totally kills some dude with a spoon and a rock.
And that's where I learned what an onlotl was.
Onlotl is amazing.
Yeah. So now, when they re-release the show, I guarantee it's going to say, from the creator of Monster, Master Keaton.
That's what the manga's definitely going to say on it, 100%.
Slayers! I love the crap out of Slayers.
Who doesn't love the crap out of Slayers?
Slayers looks like a goony comedy set in a Western-style fantasy world. It's actually mostly a shonen fighting show.
Right, people think about Slayers, even if they've seen it, and the first thing that comes to mind is like comedic fantasy, right? Because you think about, you know, them eating way too much food at the inn, and then the inn always getting blown up right after that. You know, you think about jokes about people have boobs too big and boobs too small, right? All these sorts of things, you know, swords and whatnot. Prince Phil.
Oh my God, Prince Phil, passing his cake.
Fishman, Wolfman, all this ridiculous stuff. That's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about Slayers. If you actually watch Slayers and pay attention, sit there with a checklist. And every time you watch an episode that's funny, check it, you know, check off on your paper. And if the episode is serious and actually about the fantasy plot, don't check anything. You're gonna have a lot less checks than you actually have to fight the bad guy and beat him to save the world.
And there's actually a lot of the characters standing there giving their speeches and powering up. It's almost everything you get from a shonen fighting show. But it's easy to overlook it. Kind of like how Yuki Kajiura's music was so good that I overlooked how bored I was by the plot of Dot Hack Sign. I watch all of Slayers because I'm so invested in these characters, and I'm so invested in the wacky comedy that I kind of forget that I don't like shonen fighting shows. Maybe I do like shonen fighting shows.
I do, I just can't watch more than one at a time.
Yeah.
The other thing that Slayers will do sometimes is they'll have an episode that's mostly serious, and they'll start it off with a one comedy scene, or throw one comedy bit into like the middle of a fight or something. Someone will insult someone in a funny way to sort of remind you, you know, what they're, you know, the part of the reason that you like these characters and whatnot. But then the rest of the episode is, no, seriously guys, the world will end if we don't fight.
Alright.
Okay.
So a lot of people like to recommend bad anime and tell you it's bad. We all think as nerds, hey, Let's watch that really bad movie, and we'll all MST3K it together. We'll get drunk and watch this ridiculously bad anime. It's gonna be totally fun. Yeah, that's usually not fun.
Right, see, when you say not unlike what they seem, right, most of you have been talking about things that seem good and are actually bad. This is not something that seems bad, but is actually good. No, this is really bad. There's a reason. But it's bad, people think it's bad in one way, it's bad in a different way than what you expect.
So you'll see, like, people like to review this movie. This movie is awful. But a lot of times, when people review an anime, they review a manga, they review a video game, they do that sort of angry video game nerd yelling about how bad it is, and then you think, oh, I'll go watch it to enjoy how bad it is, to appreciate their commentary. And that seems to become more and more of a trend. People will like to watch bad shows to either make fun of them, to enjoy them in this sort of ironic way. And there are shows that can do that.
Lots of them.
But a lot of conventions even will have contests where they will show Odin, Photon, Sailor, Starlight, Space Mutiny, whatever you want to call it.
Photon, Space Sailor, Starlight.
Or Odin, Starlight, Mutiny.
That's a different one.
Or Odin, they're basically the same.
They're all Odin.
So you think they'll have contests where they'll show it. And everyone who's still in the room
and
awake wins a t-shirt. The concept of that is great. The reality is that you are wasting precious con hours and you will get literally no enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, you cannot, like, there's nothing to be gained. You think, oh, this is so bad, it's good. No, it's just so bad and boring, you will fall asleep and maybe hurt yourself.
And two, if you think you can be clever enough to MST3K it, you know, Mystery Science Theater 3000.
No one has succeeded.
Yes, that is way
Professionals have gone down that road and failed.
And you've all been in anime screenings where that guy in the back of the room yells out the really funny thing at the crucial moment. And everyone laughs hysterically. It's the funniest thing
There's
ever.
no opportunity during any moment in this movie to do that.
So if you want to watch a bad anime, go full on bad. If an anime doesn't scar you to the point that you remember it in such detail that it haunts your dreams, it's not bad enough to enjoy as being bad. This is an abhorrent show.
This is exactly what it seems, this show.
This is a show, can't really recommend it to, again, not an 18+ family.
Humans shouldn't watch this.
But this show is recommended to me as a show that will keep me up at night. The guy who told us, hey, you want to watch this, said, I was never able to finish it. So we all got together at a party, downstairs, there was like a 2-floor party, and we started watching it. So we had like 10 people who were watching it. Half the people in the room, within 5 minutes, walked out in disgust. We watched it all the way through, and all I have to say is that this show is horrible, but I remember it. And the experience was almost enjoyable, because it's so bad that you can enjoy just how bad
There are plenty of things to yell out and be funny during this show.
There are also plenty of things to reference in polite company. If I'm with another survivor of that night, and I mention, hey, remember the tit bear? Yeah. It's not what you think it is.
Oh no, it's pretty literal.
No, but you might think something perverted or porny.
Oh no.
It's just a bear covered in furry, like, lumps. And there's really no other way to describe it. And they fight it. And it's full of acid, I guess.
I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know where that bear came from.
I forget what the plot was around. I just remember the image. It's in my brain.
I mean, the show has a scene where there's a character who's a man, but sometimes a woman. Never really tell you why.
And not like Baron Asher, where it's like woman on one side, man on the other. It's just like, you know, and it's not like, oh, it's just a transgender person, okay. It's like switching back and forth with no explanation.
Like, hair's long, hair's short, hair's long. Is that even the same character? Well, they keep using the same name. What pronoun do they use? It's kind of random.
Is it the same voice actor? Are they using the same voice?
Can't tell if it's the same voice actor. And then they give you their backstory, and that still does not reveal what the deal is for them. This is the show that Daryl Surratt of Anime World Order basically got his panel shut down at Otakon because and he featured this character, I hesitate to call it character.
Person thing?
This character kills someone in the show.
Actually, like rocket ships are pretty awesome.
They're really sharp though, I can wear those earrings.
They still look cool.
Yeah. Yeah, this character kills another character, and he featured it as one of the top 10 craziest deaths in all of anime.
Yeah, probably.
So, there's two different kinds of the bad recommendation. If I want to recommend a show to you that's bad, but you want to enjoy how bad it is, then I'll recommend it like that. Here's how bad this show is, let's go. But a show like this, if someone tries to sell you a show on how bad it is, and they cannot give you a detailed explanation of why it's so bad, don't watch it. You're in for a really long and boring night.
Watch something good. Good is good, bad is bad.
Now this is important because you need to be able to recommend anime to your friends. And a lot of the reasons that your friends won't watch the anime you're trying to recommend to them is because you're recommending it poorly. The more proper nouns you use, the less likely it is that I'm going to listen to you. No, you don't want to tell someone, oh, this is a show about the seekers, upper class S, who are seeking the key of the twilight. All that's capitalized.
Notice this is usually the way that anime companies recommend anime on the back of the DVD case, or Blu-ray case, or whatever it may be.
I mean, when I want to sell this show, I say it's a retro future alien story with some Scooby-Doo mystery mixed in. Want to sell this? Shonen fight, whatever. Bad show, bad show, bad show. I guess I'm not going to sell this for this weird sex scene at the end. I'm going to sell it in spite of the sex scene at the end. If a guy ever tells you about the show and mentions anything creepy or anything pornographic, never listen to anything they recommend ever again. If someone tries to sell you Kill La Kill about the nakedness, never listen to anything they recommend ever again.
But still watch the show.
Yeah, the show is great.
There we go.
So Space Day!
Yes.
Okay, so this show was announced, and everyone, right, first of all, without Cowboy Bebop, no one would care about this show. The only reason this show is a deal at all is because Cowboy Bebop already existed, right? So it's like, we already made this other show, it was already a hit in the US that's super remembered, or we're finally making something new and amazing, so therefore, you should promote the hell out of it. So they did, right? If that previous show did not exist, Space Dandy would be like a flip on the radar, no one would care. But now, because of it, it's on American TV before it's on Japanese TV. That's the way the world works.
And a lot of people were really disappointed in this show. Because if you look at Twitter, or you look at Tumblr before this show came out, it's Cowboy Bebop 2. It's something, it's Cowboy Bebop, Cowboy Bebop's coming back. Look at
It's the same anime.
Cowboy Bebop, oh my god. Yeah. It's not Cowboy Bebop.
It's not bad. It's actually really good. I watch it every episode that comes out.
It's actually a lot more like this than it is like Cowboy Bebop.
It is very much like that. But yeah, it wasn't about it seeming like anything, right? If all you knew about Space Dandy was Space Dandy, right, it would seem exactly like what it is. But because you had this sort of meta expectation, right, from the news and from things you know about anime culture and anime history, you know about Cowboy Bebop, you know the same people who made that are making Space Dandy. It doesn't seem, you have this expectation that it's going to be like something that it's not like.
I watched the sea of people being retweeted when they watched episode 1 and were really mad that it wasn't a serious show.
I mean, this happens a lot too. Like, you'll have an expectation that, maybe like Studio Gainax, right? And they made Evangelion, and they made all these shows that you really liked. And then Mahoromatic comes out. And it's like you were expecting more Evangelion, but you got Mahoromatic.
You might even be tricked. You might have watched a whole bunch of Mahoromatic, expecting it to have that Eva twist. You're waiting for it to be dark and sick. No.
It's still
Never
Mahoromatic.
happens.
Yeah, sorry guys. At least there's a cute dance in the closer.
So, since we're pretty much running out of time, if you want these slides, because you want to remember what shows we talked about, then we're going to upload them tonight. If you go to that website, the slides from this, from all our other panels, will be up there. Also, if you can't come to our Judge Anime by its cover at 7:30 in the Constitution Room, the video of it from Anime Boston last year is online. And remember,
but that's last year's shows.
Brendan hated. No, so you know what you can do? We reviewed a whole bunch of anime before they came out. Now those anime are out, so people can watch that to figure out if we were right or not. And it might seem like a contradiction because this panel was anime aren't what they seem. You can't judge them from their cover. The next panel is literally you can judge every single anime by its cover. You want to find out why we gave the opposite moral in two panels? You have to come to that panel.
I think everyone will come to that panel. Find us on the internet. We're done.
And enjoy the rest of your anime Boston.